The Princess of the Chalet School, Chapter 23, The Garden Party. One of the most important questions of the Chalet School at the end of each term was always, "What shall we do for the end of term?" They had had a concert, several in fact. They had given a nativity play. One term they had an exhibition of work of all kinds, and another they had given a folk festival, when they had danced folk dances and sung folk songs to the great enjoyment of their audience. For they had not kept to one country alone, but had shown the whole. They had done Norwegian dances and Old English, Morris, and country dances. In addition to this, they had sung folk songs of all the countries that were represented in the school, and had finished up with some of the lovely old German songs. It really seemed, as Miss Bettany said, that they had done everything they could do. "I'm afraid we shall have to begin to repeat ourselves," she said to the school, who had been called into consultation. "Can anyone think of something different?" There was silence, while everyone racked their brain. "Could we give a kind of water festival?" suggested Grizel. "I'm afraid not. You see, we haven't any private baths where you could show your diving and swimming, and if we gave it in the lake, we should have a far larger audience than we wanted." "Should we arrange a little masque?" asked Bet. "It would be delightful if we could, but I'm afraid we couldn't do one long enough to make people think it was worth while having come for that only. We might combine it with something else, though." Then Elisaveta had an idea. This was before she and Joey had gone off. "Let's give a garden party," she had suggested. "We could do the masque then and give some dancing too." It was hailed as a grand idea, and the staff had put their heads together and had written a charming little masque among them. It was to be called the Court of Queen of Summer, and would give everybody something to do. Marie von Ecknew, the prettiest girl in the school, was to be the Queen of Summer, coming to hold her court in the world. And the others were to be flowers, trees, butterflies, moths, birds, and the summer winds, rain, sunshine, and mists. They had rehearsed it thoroughly and hoped it would be fine enough to give it in the garden and to have the garden party. All the last week, before the Friday which was to be the dress rehearsal, when the friends of the school, who lived in the valley, were to come to see it, people kept going to the barometer and tapping it anxiously to see if there was going to be a downpour. Friday was a glorious day, and the dress rehearsal went off fairly well, though there were several mistakes made, and Miss Durant, who was stage manager, was seen to be tearing her hair in the background. Luckily, Friday's audience was not critical, and they enjoyed the pretty play immensely. The girls went to bed feeling quite pleased with themselves on the whole. Excitement began the next morning at the early hour of 6, when Marie, who had a window cubicle, tumbled out of bed and hung over the balcony rail, anxiously inspecting the sky and the lake. "It looks as if the weather should be fine today," she reported at length. "The mountains are covered with mists, but the sky is clear and blue, and the lake is smooth like a piece of glass." "Topping," said Joey enthusiastically from her cubicle at the other end of the room. Bet, who was the prefect in charge of dormitory, sat up in bed and uttered an exclamation of horror. "Marie, come back at once. You're wearing nothing but your nightgown. You deserve to catch a bad cold, and then you'll make a pretty queen with a red nose." Marie came back to bed reluctantly, but Bet was a prefect who was always obeyed, and she did not dare to linger on the balcony. Joey, whose exploits had relegated her to the cubicle in the yellow dormitory, which was halfway down the room, and who bitterly regretted that she had ever gone off as she had done, heaved a tremendous sigh. "May I go and look out, Bet?" she pleaded. "Yes, if you put on your dressing gown and bedroom slippers," replied Bet cautiously. "And come through my cubicle, Joey." Joey scrambled into the necessary garments and patted down the dormitory and Bet's cubicle and out onto the balcony. She sniffed the air loudly with enjoyment. "It's going to be a gorgeous day," she proclaimed. "All right, Bet. I'm going back to bed now. When can we get up?" "Not for an hour yet, I hope," groaned lazy Evandine, who loved her bed in the mornings and hated getting up any sooner than she absolutely had to. "You can get up after 6:30 if you want to," replied Bet. "Do stop making that awful noise, Evandine. I didn't say you must get up, only that you might. If you want to lie till 7, you may. No one is going to stop you." "Praise heavens for that," said Evandine, snuggling down under the bedclothes with a sigh of relief. "Dormouse," said Margia scornfully. "Dormouse nothing," retorted a muffled voice. "I'm a Christian person who sees no use in dashing round before you have to." "I don't think you'd better talk," said the prefect warningly. "You may disturb other people, you know." "It sounds like it," chuckled Margia, as a bump overhead announced the fact that someone in the dormitory above them was turning out. "Wonder who that was. They'll bring the ceiling down on top of us if they barge round like that." "Grizel, I should think," said Joey. "It's about where her bed is." At that moment a voice from the balcony above was heard proclaiming to the world at large that it was a glorious morning, and that those lazy yellows weren't up yet. "Grizel, is it?" laughed Bet. Then she tumbled out and went on to the balcony and looked up. "Grizel! Grizel!" Grizel hung over her rail in a perilous manner. "Hullo! So you are awake. I thought you were all sound asleep and dreaming of cakes and pies." She stopped suddenly as a pillow flew past her into the garden. "Now you've torn it," she continued, as she turned round to her dormitory. "That landed in the middle of the flower bush. I should think that it will be like a pancake by the time we collect the pillow." "Oh, goodness, Gertrude." Gertrude, one of the oldest members of the school, laughed. "Not they. They'll come up all right. But you might slip something on and go down and fetch it, Grizel." "I dare say. It was your fault it got there. If you want it, go and get it yourself." A curly head appeared through another window further along, and the head called, "Girls, girls, what a noise you are making. You'll rouse the whole valley. If you feel so energetic, you had better get up at once." "Good morning, madame," cried Bet. "I hope we haven't woken you." The head laughed. "Oh, no, I was reading." "May we really get up?" asked Grizel eagerly. "Yes, if you like. Ask Marie for some milk and rolls when you get down, and don't go out of the garden and the field." Then she withdrew, and Grizel rushed round the other dormitories to tell the occupants that they could get up if they liked, bringing much recrimination on herself for disturbing people who had not woken early. In the yellow dormitory, Joey and Margia hurled themselves through to Evandine and hauled her out of bed, protesting and shrieking. "You've got to get up! You've got to get up!" chanted Joey. "Grab her bedclothes, Margia. Come on, Dormouse. You're up now, and a jolly good thing, too. You'll be getting as fat as a pig if you spend so much time in bed." Shrieks of laughter greeted them, for Evandine was as thin as she could be, with arms and legs like sticks. No matter what they gave her, she never seemed to get any fatter. All the past winter she had been dosed with cod-liver oil, much to her disgust, and it had made no difference that anyone could see. She was healthy enough, but as Joey had somewhat vaguely expressed it, she didn't pay for feeding. There was a noise such as would have brought nemesis on them in less than no time had it been on ordinary day. Luckily for them, a good deal of license was allowed on such a morning, and getting up was anything but the proper demure affair it generally was. Jo, flying through the dormitory on her way to the bathroom, was soaked by a sponge hurled by Evandine, who, since she was up, was determined to pay out her terminator. Marie got tangled in her sheets when she carried them out to the balcony to air, and fell headlong into Bet's arms, which, as the prefect was not expecting her, caused a general upset, and Miss Bethany appeared at the door to inquire if they were murdering each other. When at length they were downstairs, the majority of them raced across to Le Petit Chalet, waving the rolls Marie had given to them, standing in a group, serenading its inhabitants, with a rendering of Clementine sung in various keys. It was nearly 7 when this all took place. The babies, of course, were delighted, and got dressed at a rate which sent them downstairs long before the usual time. The rest of the morning, until Meta Jensen at 12 o'clock, was a whirl of noise and laughter. Marie got through her work for the day as quickly as she could, and several of the children helped her. The seniors were busy putting little tables in various nooks and corners of the garden ready for tea, and the juniors acted as messengers and did odd jobs for everyone. At 2 o'clock they all assembled in the field, dressed in white frocks, ready to receive their guests. Miss Bethany looked at them proudly. They looked such a bonny, healthy set of girls. She had always insisted that they should be like a big family, and she felt that her efforts had been crowned with success when she saw them as they stood there. Then the parents began to arrive, and for an hour or more they were kept busy welcoming them, showing them the garden and the school and everything that was of interest beside a good deal that was not. At 3 the girls slipped off to get ready for the masque, and the staff, with the exception of Miss Durant and Mr. Denny, who had trained them in the songs, began to usher the visitors into their seats, which had been placed down the path and on the grass behind the path. The play itself was to take place in the other part of the garden, with the background of the trellis work covered with climbing roses, clematis, passion flowers, and Virginia creeper. When the last guest had been seated, a little bell rang, and at once there rose the sound of lovely old English round, "Summer is a comin' in," sung by the whole school. After it was over, there was a moment of pause, and then a little figure in blue, with a taller one in white and gold, danced and spoke the return of summer to the north. They were quickly followed by heartsease, narcissus, lily, dahlia, grass, and sunflower, while the trees marched along very tall and proud. A merry dance followed, up tails all, and the flowers scattered, and butterflies, bees, moths fluttered in, singing Lievertag, a trilling song, and the flowers joined in, and the harmony of the young voices was so sweet the people passing outside paused to listen. Finally there was the sound of horns, and then the south wind, the herald of summer, strode in, clad in a short blue tunic, with her black hair braided with wreaths of buds, and her hunter's horn wreathed in roses. Joey looked almost pretty for once in her life. She marched forward, blowing lustily, and then, standing in the midst of the pretty groups of flowers and insects, sang "Enter Summer," a dainty little composition of Mr. Denny's, written expressly for the play. No time was allowed for applause, or she would have had an encore, for her voice was sweet and true as a bird's. Just as she finished, there came chiming of bells, cowbells, borrowed for the occasion and rung by Marie, Miss Durant, and Mr. Denny. The Queen of Summer entered with her court. Marie von Ecknew had never looked lovelier than at that moment, and she passed slowly over the summer grass in her white gown with its edgings of summer flowers, her hand full of roses, and a wreath of marguerites and alpine roses on her golden hair. She was followed by her courtiers, the other winds, the birds, and the remainder of the flowers. Strewing flowers in front of her were the 2 youngest children in the school, Inga, Robin, dressed as alpine roses and looking delightfully important. Queen Summer paused in the middle of her loyal subjects and stood there, her hands outspread, while she spoke a speech of welcome to all present. It had taken 6 weeks and 5 people to get that speech into Marie, who was not clever, and who had more than one weep over it. But everyone felt that it had been well worth all the trouble as they looked at her and heard the words coming clear and musical from her. She was throned after that, and then the subject of summer came forward in turn and kneeling offered her their gifts. The flowers laid sheaves of their name blossoms at her feet, the trees presented branches and their leaves, the butterflies, moths, birds, bees danced for her, and the whole court sang another song. Then summer thanked them and bade them all join in a final merry round before Poppy should scatter her slumber-laden petals, and they danced salingers round. The dance over, the courtiers fell into pretty groups, and to the sound of golden slumbers sung by the south wind poppy, Juliet, danced slowly in and out among the flowers, who swayed backwards and forwards, slowly sinking, till they were all laying down in graceful attitudes. The insects and birds followed their example, and the masque ended with the group covered with little masses of bright colors and living statuary, which Mr. Denny declared were far more beautiful than any Greek ones he had ever seen. A charming touch finished it, and this was an inspection of the girls. While the audience was applauding lustily, Queen Summer rose from her throne, gathered up a great armful of her tributes, and went slowly over the grass to where the head was sitting at the side between Frau Marini and Frau Mensch. The clapping died away as the people watched the children. Wondering what this child was going to do, Marie reached the chair, and then she knelt gracefully on one knee and offered her lovely burden. "For Madame, with all our love," she said shyly. Madge took the flowers slowly, her eyes pricking at the back. It was so unexpected and so delightful that she had known that these girls loved her. It would have been impossible for her not to know it now, but for their affection to be shown as openly as it was totally unexpected. The parents were almost as pleased as she was, and promptly applauded them, while she thanked her girls shyly. After that there was an interval for tea, during which the prefects acted as waitresses, while the younger girls went round making conversation. At one of the tables sat a tall old man with magnificent head of white hair and a long beard to match. Miss Bethany paused beside him for a few minutes, and something he said brought the color to her face. Then she turned and caught the robin who was going past, and sent her to Joey. That young lady left Frau von Eckenu reluctantly, and came to see what her sister wanted. The tall old man looked at her surprised. "But it is this young lady?" he asked. "I had thought that it must be someone older." "I'm nearly 15, protested Jo. He smiled. "Nearly 15, are you? Well, young lady, I suppose I do not seem a stranger to you. I know that my granddaughter has my portrait in her cubicle, and she has told me that she shares a room with you." Joey looked at him again. "Great stars!" she exclaimed. "You are the king!" His Majesty King Ridolfo of Belsornia bowed to her. "You are right. Do you know why I want to speak to you?" "'Cause I'm Elizaveta's friend," replied Joey promptly. "That is true, but there is more than that." Jo went scarlet. I suppose you think I ought to have looked after her better," she stammered. He burst out laughing. "Not quite that. No, my child. I want to thank you for what you did in bringing her safely back. It would have been a terrible thing for Belsornia if anything had happened. Will you let me shake hands with you?" Jo, with a knowledge of very sticky fingers, she had been eating ices, looked rather dismayed, but she put them into his obediently, and then he stooped and kissed her affectionately on the cheek. "You will allow an old man the privilege," he said rather huskily. To Jo's way of thinking, she hadn't had much to say on the matter. However, she promptly kissed him back, which pleased him immensely, and then she went to fetch Elizaveta to him, as she didn't know he was there. "You are very good, sire," said Madge after the child had gone. I blamed myself for not taking more care of her Highness. You took very good care of her, madame, he replied. There was no blame attached to you, even if there had been the action of your little sister in going off as bravely as she did to fetch her back, would have wiped it out of sight. Then Elisaveta appeared, a rather dazed-looking Elisaveta, who was not accustomed to this amount of interest from her grandfather. She had indeed insisted that Joey must have made a mistake somehow, and had almost had to be dragged to the spot by this young lady. However, after that, she never doubted again, for the king took her in his arms as if she had been the boy he had so longed for, and held her closely. Later on, when Joe had been summoned to them again, she said, "Oh, your majesty, what happened to Cosimo?" "He is dead," the king said shortly. "Dead? Do you mean you had him executed?" Joey was breathless with interest. The king thought it was best to tell them exactly what had happened. "He was found at the foot of a ravine, not far from the German end of the pass," he said. "No one knows how it happened, but we think he must have slipped and fallen, breaking his neck. So there is nothing further to fear from him." "I see," said Joe. She was silent for a minute or two, and His Majesty watched her with a smile. He wondered what she was thinking. It came. "If he's dead, then who's the next heir?" demanded Joe. The king's arm tightened round Elisaveta. "My little granddaughter," he said. Two startled faces confronted him. "Me?" gasped the princess. "Her?" exclaimed Joey. "But I thought you had some Salic law in Belsornia." The king nodded. "We had," he said. "Now it is done with, by the wish of the Grand Council and the two houses of the state." Joey thought a minute. "Will you take her away, then?" she asked. "No," His Majesty said with decision. "She will stay here for another year. After that she must come home and learn the lessons that a future queen has to learn. And even though she may never come to the throne, but then I hope she will not be alone." He sent them off after that, for he had a good deal to say to Madge, and some arrangements to make with her, and they only saw him to say good-bye. Joey's opinion of him was delivered to the dormitory at large as they were going to bed that night. "He's a dear," she said. Then, as an afterthought, "It's a pity he's got such a scratchy beard, though." Chapter 24. The Wedding. Joey was wakened quite early by someone pushing her and crying, "Zoe, Zoe, wake up, Zoe! It is Tante Marguerite's day. Wake up!" Jo sat up in bed, her hair all on end, and looking at the robin in startled fashion. "Goodness, Robin, what time is it?" The robin shook her head. "I don't know," she said. "Come, Zoe, Tante Marguerite said last night that we could go to her first thing this morning." Jo burrowed under her pillow and produced her watch. 5 o'clock? She'd have something to say if we waked her at this hour. The robin's face fell. "How long must we wait?" she asked plaintively. "Tante Marguerite did say as soon as we woke up." "I dare say, but she never reckoned on our rooting her out at 5 o'clock in the morning," returned Joey. "It would be awfully mean to wake her now, Robin. She'd be as tired at the end of the day if we did. Get into bed beside me, and we'll wait till 6:30. I honestly don't think we ought to go in before then." The robin gave a little sigh, but she was a reasonable small person, and she said no more, but climbed in beside Joey. "Isn't it quiet?" she asked presently. "It always is after the term," replied Jo. "So it is." There was a little silence, and then the baby spoke again, very drowsily this time. "Zoe, will you tell me a story?" Joey wriggled round into a more comfortable position and began at once. She was able to oblige with a story at any time, and this was one reason why the robin thought her the most delightful playfellow there ever was. The story was all about a wicked old witch who stole little children and turned them into singing birds. And then she shut them up in cages and made them sing for her whenever she wanted. Jo had got so far when she was interrupted. "Supposing they couldn't sing?" "They could, when she had finished with them," replied Jo darkly. "I suppose it would be her magic," the robin said, very sleepy now. "Go on." Joey went on, weaving a wonderful story about a little girl who wouldn't be turned into a singing bird, so that the witch said, "Very well, then you shall be a pig," and proclaimed to carry out her words. She had got as far when she discovered that the robin was fast asleep, and as she had no idea of wasting a perfectly good story on the air, she stopped and turned her thoughts to the coming events. School had broken up on the Monday after the garden party, and many of the girls had gone away from the Tarnsee until next term. Many of the families, however, had all taken chalets for the summer holidays as at various points round the lake, so there were still a good number of them left to come to the head's wedding. It was to take place in the big schoolroom, which they had decorated the day before, and the English chaplain from Innsbruck was at the Crown Prince Karl in readiness, for it was to take place early, and the honeymoon was to be spent in Italy, and they didn't want to break the journey. When it was all over, Madge and Dr. Jem had gone away. Joey, Juliet, and the robin were to go to the Marnies for a week, and then the Minches for another week. After that, Madge and the doctor would return, and they were all going to Valsornia. The newly married pair would be there only a few days, as Dr. Jem did not think he could be spared from the Senalp any longer. While Joey and the robin spent the rest of the holidays with Elisaveta, Captain Humphreys, and Miss Denny, sister of the school singing master, would take Juliet to London to see her safely settled down at the university. Captain Humphreys had some business to attend to in Devonshire, and Miss Denny would put in a round of visits, so it all fitted in very well. Joey was sorry to lose Juliet, who had been like another sister to her during the 2 years she had been at the school, and it would be a year before they would meet again, as the elder girl was to stay in England until the long vacation. But just now her thoughts were with her sister. From the time she had been brought to England, a delicate baby of a few months old, she had never been away from Madge for any length of time. Of course she liked Jem very much, and he would be a topping brother. But all the same, Joey felt sad somehow to think that she would no longer be the first in her sister's life. She would be at the chalet in term time and only go to the Sanalp for holidays. She wouldn't see Madge every day, and it would be different. Joey had a very conservative nature, and she hated changes. Of course, she would still have the robin. That was one comfort, but it wouldn't be the same. Here Joey tossed so violently that she nearly landed onto the floor, which startled her and brought her to herself. The robin was still sleeping, and it had only just chimed 6, so she would have to stay where she was for a little while. Then she decided that she needn't stay in bed anyway, so she got up, dressed, and went out onto the balcony. It was going to be another glorious day, for though the mountains were swathed with mist, the sun was shining brightly, and the Tarnsee lay like a sheet of glass, so blue that no words could describe its blueness. Joey leant against the balcony rail, gazing at it and thinking hard, when she felt a light touch on her shoulder, and turning, saw her sister already dressed. "Hush," whispered Miss Bethany. "Don't wake the robin. Come along with me, and we'll go for a short walk." "I couldn't sleep either, so I thought I'd come and see if you were awake." Joey slipped into the room like a ghost and followed her sister downstairs and out into the fresh summer air, feeling happier. When they were clear of the garden and walking round the lake, Madge slipped her arm through her younger sister's. "Joey, you aren't happy," she said accusingly. "Yes, I am," contradicted Jo. "It's only that I hate losing you." "You aren't losing me," said Madge quickly. "Do you really think I'd let you?" Joey turned her head away, blinking back the tears that would come, and said with suspicious gruffness, "It isn't exactly losing, I know, but it won't ever be the same again. And if it wasn't that, I like Jem so much. I'd hate him." She wound up with a sudden burst of candor. Madge pressed the arm she was holding. "I'm sorry, Joey. I can see your point of view, of course." "I don't want you not to be married," Jo went on. "I'm jolly lucky to have had you so long, only, well, anyway, I hope Jim knows how frightfully lucky he is, that's all." She glared ferociously at her sister, who promptly began to laugh. "Joey, don't look like that. You look ready to eat poor Jem." Joey's face relaxed, and she joined her sister's laughter. "It sounds mean and selfish, I know," she acknowledged. "But it's how I feel. Only, Madge, I do hope you'll be awfully happy and have everything you want. Jim is a dear. I like him awfully, but you're the only sister I have." Madge stooped and kissed the delicate face beside her. "Joey, it shall be just the same. You're my only sister, and I couldn't ever do without you." Jo brightened up once more and flung her arms round her sister in an overpowering hug. "You're a sport. There never was a sister like you." "Thank you, Joey. I can say the same. Now I suppose we had better go back, or the robin will be waking up and looking for us." They turned back to the house and were met at the top of the stairs by a very reproachful young person. "You got up and left me alone, Zoe," she said. "I'll fetch her," said Madge. "Aren't you going to kiss me, baby?" The robin bestowed a hug and a kiss on her, and then consented to trot off and dress herself. When she was ready, Joey led her along to Madge's room. They had a nice little talk until frost struck, which was at 7:45. The rest of the morning seemed to go very quickly after that. 9:30 saw Juliet, Joey, and the robin dressed ready in their white bridesmaids' frocks, with big bouquets of red roses and carnations, which Jem had brought from Innsbruck the previous evening, while the schoolroom was filled with guests who had come to see the marriage. The civil wedding had taken place the day before, but there hadn't been any guests there. Only the 3 girls and Dr. Maynard. Miss Maynard's brother had come to join Dr. Jem at the sanatorium. Now everyone who could manage it was there. Suddenly there was a little stir, and the door opened, and Madge came up the room, leaning on Herr Mensch's arm. She looked very lovely, Joey thought, in her shimmering white dress and soft veil, carrying red roses like her bridesmaids. Then the child was aware that the chaplain was speaking, and the service had begun. It was over very quickly, and Marguerite Bettany had become Marguerite Russell almost before she had realized it. The register was signed, and they all went out into the garden, where Marie and Egan were waiting with a splendid meal ready. It was a very jolly wedding. There were the speeches and toasts, without which no Troyline could ever manage such an affair, and Madge blushed scarlet when Herr Marini alluded to her as Frau Dr. Russell. They had forgotten all about the trains in their enjoyment, so Madge had to scuffle into her going-away clothes. At length she was ready, and it was time. For Jem was calling up the stairs to know if she was going to be much longer. "The Padre has lent us his car," he said as she appeared. "So come along, you people." They were all packed in, and then set off along the side of the lake. As the car was 2-seater, and there were 5 of them, it was rather squashed. Madge took the robin on her knee, Joey squeezed in beside them, and Juliet stood on the footboard, holding on to the side, while Jim drove. The chaplain was to walk along after them. He would drive the children back. "It was very good of you," said Madge as she gave him her hand. "Goodbye, and thank you very much." "Goodbye, Mrs. Russell," he said with a smile. "Good hunting." The visitors had gathered round them. There was a chorus of good wishes as the car began to move, and then Herr Marini set the example, throwing a handful of flowers at them, and everybody threw flowers after them, so that they left the Brasau Peninsula looking, as Madge said, as if they were bound for the Covent Garden. Joey got a caterpillar down her neck and nearly drove her sister wild by her frantic wiggles. "It's all very well," she complained, when Madge implored her to sit still. "The beastly thing's going further down." Luckily they reached the sea spits just then, so that Juliet kindly fished it out for her, and then they all ran for the train. The porter met them with a wide grin. He was another member of the Peffin family, and he knew all about what had been happening, of course. He helped them in and tucked a bunch of alpine roses into Madge's hand as he passed her case in. She thanked him, and then turned to say goodbye to her little sister. "Goodbye, my Joey. Take care of yourself. Goodbye, Madge. Have a good time." The porter lifted her down, for the train was actually beginning to move. She wriggled herself free of him and turned to the other two. They at once responded. At the top of their voices, they all yelled, "Auf Wiedersehen!" The last glimpse they had showed Madge's face nearly purple with embarrassment, while Jem was laughing so violently that he was holding on to the side of the seat. "And that's the end of that," said Joey, as they walked to the car to await the chaplain's arrival.